This conference will now be recorded.
I wasn't sure how many people would actually show up today.
I gotta behave myself because I'm sitting.
Yeah. I'm a pastor too.
Yeah, you're
Right.
sitting between two pastors.
And actually, he's a pastor.
All right. Carpenter, like Jesus himself. All right. I better behave. Well, I'm a troublemaker, but it's mostly good trouble.
So,
Ready for roll call? Kevin Cox,
I am here.
Osper,
here,
George Lozano,
Present.
Dwayne Eastman. He was going to try to join us on here, but he's not here yet. Dottie Smith.
all right, the consent agenda.
Just the minutes.
Okay. let's
January.
Look at the minutes.
We're a little behind.
Yeah.
Any discussion on, motion or discussion on the minutes? of January 27th?
That was the last time we actually had we met, but it wasn't.
You're right.
Yeah, you didn't have a quorum in
We
May.
didn't have a quorum, so it was just a meeting.
Have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make that motion that we approve the minutes.
I will second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passed. Okay, so, items for discussion. Review the proposed awning on 305 South Second, Josh?
Summit?
Yes, this is a pretty simple project. I almost didn't even bring it for review because it's not much different than the last one. But this is Family Life Services. They are replacing the existing awning with a new one. It looks pretty similar to the existing one. I don't know how well you can see that. It's in your packet too. Just a simple awning. They wanted I think it got ripped or something. Not in this storm. It was something that it's been a while they've been working on this. But essentially for awnings, as long as they're that what the guidelines call shed shaped, they can be fixed. They can be the movable ones, shaped around a window opening, made from canvas or synthetic fabrics such as acrylic or polyester coated canvas. This one follows that as well. And awnings that reflect the storefront opening, structural bays, one awning for each bay. So one of the main things we're looking at for awnings is to make sure they don't stretch over more than one building. This one, let me scroll down to where this is what they're proposing. There's a couple different options. I don't know what the final one is, but this is essentially, they're basically the same. But this is what it would look like. So it's just over that one storefront. Typically, if it meets all of those things that I just said, or it doesn't go too far outside one of those, that it would be acceptable, and I would recommend that you approve that awning as it is.
It's also a non-contributing building, right?
It is a non-contributing building
So
because of the
changes
facade.
to the facade.
Slip cover on it, I believe. So that's another reason that it's.
Yes, exactly. That's another reason why it shouldn't be a big question.
Okay, any discussion or questions?
I think it's pretty simple here. I mean,
Do I hear a motion to approve?
I make a motion that we approve suggested on.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
That's probably our easiest review we've ever done. All right. So the second item we have on our agenda tonight was to have a public meeting. So I have Christy Davis with Davis Preservation, who we hired for our project downtown to relook at our district. Remember, it has not been updated since 1983. And so there's definitely some problems, not problems necessarily, but it's out of date. Yeah. And so that's why we're looking at this. We're using the survey that we did back in 2018 as a backbone for this project. Christy has indicated that she may review some of those even, because there may even be some changes since 2018 that have changed
We
it.
don't think there's a lot.
Not a lot, but.
We're just gonna make sure.
And so part of the agreement that we have with the SHPO is that she's supposed to hold public meetings, so that we can help explain what we're doing. And so, well, we have one member of the public here today, but this is also being recorded. And I don't know if you're aware, but Christy also met with a whole bunch of property owners. So this is not the first time that we're touching this. A lot of them already know, which may be why they've chosen not to. I didn't really
There are.
publish this either.
Christy, who are you with? Davis Preservation.
So, Christy, what was your sense of just what the public were they open to?
I'm happy to just give you a summary if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think just start with that.
All right. First off, thank you. It's been a pleasure working in your community. I have had a chance to meet a number of property owners. I'm Christy Davis. I'm a fifth generation Kansan. I've worked in every county in the state. I ran the state preservation office for years. I've worked for local, state, and federal government. My background is historic preservation, and I appreciate the opportunity to work in Arc City. I have worked in your community before, so it's good to be back. Actually have family in Cowley County that I'll be staying with this evening, so that's it's been a fun excuse for me to check in with them. So Brenda Spencer, who carried out the survey for you all in 2018, is trying really hard to retire. She's a good friend of mine. I had not seen the RFP for this project, but she reached out to me and told me about it. So I put her proposal in and appreciate the opportunity to help. The survey that Brenda did in 2018 took the existing historic district and then tried to think about some changes that have happened over time. You all may not know this, but your downtown historic district is one of the first in the state. 1983 is very early, especially for Kansas. And I'm not sure the whole story behind that, but you must have had some pretty ambitious property owners or citizens that help promote that, and that's a good thing. But because it's so early, it is a little different than what we would see now. When you're looking at historic buildings, there's certain things that cause them to be eligible, to meet certain criteria for being eligible for listing or being contributors to historic districts. Generally, they're buildings that are at least 50 years old. So you can imagine there's a lot of stuff that's 50 years old now that was not in 1983. And so there are also buildings. So the district boundaries were very narrow in 1983. There were buildings within the boundaries that were identified then that weren't yet 50 years old. Buildings within districts, as you know, contributors or non-contributors. And that was all reevaluated in 2018 to look at, here within the existing boundaries, are there buildings that were identified as non-contributors that would be contributors today because of their age? And then also, are there buildings within the existing district boundaries that may no longer meet the requirements of integrity, historic or architectural integrity requirements to be classified as contributors? And so that was evaluated as well. But as you all know, and you've got a copy of the map, there are also buildings kind of on the outskirts of downtown, many of them built 1930s, 40s, a little later than some of the 19th century buildings that make up most of your downtown. Those were evaluated as well. And so the survey went through, surveyed a broader boundary, and then identified what properties within that boundary would be considered contributors, and then made recommendations for a new district boundary based on kind of the preponderance of contributing buildings. And there's a reason for that. You all, I know, are familiar with it, but in Kansas, we have a state historic tax credit program, And since the 1980s, a lot has changed. Historic preservation in Kansas until about the early 2000s was considered kind of punitive. We had sticks but no carrots. And since the early 2000s, we've had a historic tax credit program. Folks want to be eligible for that program because, as you know, these buildings require a lot of money to maintain. And so we want to make sure as many properties downtown will qualify for the historic tax credits, because that means people are more apt to invest in their buildings and maintain them. A few years ago, I was involved. So I wrote the original legislation for the state historic tax credit, and I've been advocating for it ever since. It's one of the few economic development programs that survived the Brownback administration, and I'm pretty proud of that. It took a huge grassroots effort and a lot of help. It was a huge grassroots effort and a lot of help from state legislators, including your own, by the way, and also from business owners and the banking community. So we got support from all over the place to maintain that program, and we've continued to improve it over time. A few years ago, I worked on legislation that enhanced the tax credit for rural communities. And this past legislative session, we got an additional enhancement for larger projects in communities that are a little larger as well. So in addition to commercial buildings, we've seen, obviously, with your downtown buildings, you've got, is it RCB Bank? No.
Union State is.
Union State Bank, that's had a tax credit project on it. So in addition to income producing properties, the state tax credit also applies to non-income producing properties. And you here have some, well, for instance, City Hall would technically be an example of that qualifying for tax credits. The reason is, in Kansas, our rehab tax credit program, it's a tax credit, but even if you don't have a tax liability, you can use the tax credit because it's transferable. You can sell them. And so if you're a nonprofit, if you're a school, or a for-profit, you can qualify for rehab tax credits. And with our state program, there's a pretty low threshold. It's any project over $5,000, which is any project. Actually, right now, any project is about $100,000. I mean, really, if you're doing work on old buildings. So that program, since we started it, has leveraged about over $1 billion in private investment in Kansas, which has had an economic impact of about $10 billion. Many of the downtown historic districts that we have in Kansas now were nominated after that legislation passed, after the state rehab credit, because all of a sudden there was an incentive. What you all have is a district that predates it. You listed your district before this incentive existed, and what I've learned is that there's a lot of people in your community, including folks who own buildings downtown, that aren't familiar with the program. And tonight is technically the kickoff public meeting for this project. I've been hired to take the recommendations that Brenda made in 2018 and update the district nomination. But in talking with Josh, I know Josh has had a lot of civic engagement from downtown building owners. You all know this. A lot of downtown buildings were damaged in storms in June. And do any of you all own buildings downtown? I'm sure you've heard from folks, though. It's a yep. Okay, so you know. The majority of the buildings, I believe, were damaged downtown during that storm in June. And ordinarily, what would happen is, folks go to their insurance agent and they have a deductible. Historically, folks have had kind of a flat deductible. It's been the same forever. It might be $5,000. So people knew, okay, I can make the deductible. The insurance should help bridge the gap. But the insurance industry has changed a lot, even over the last few years. And a lot of your downtown business owners are in a situation, and I think this is probably why they came running to Josh. When they called their insurance companies and said, we've had this storm, we need to replace the roof, come inspect it. what they learned is that the terms of their insurance policies have changed. And many of the policies now have set kind of a sliding deductible that's based on a percentage of the value of your building rather than a flat deductible. And the insurance company kind of changed this, I think, without a lot of probably without a lot of engagement with their policy holders. And so folks were unpleasantly surprised when they reached out to their insurance agents, because a lot of them learned now it's a percentage of the value of your building. And oh, by the way, the insurance company gets to decide what the value of your building is. And oh, by the way, even though it's in Arc City, we're going to place a value on it that would make sense somewhere else in the country. And they've placed the values of these buildings very high, and it's created a huge burden for your downtown business owners. Some folks have had, are in a situation where they may close their doors. I believe that there's at least one that's done that. Not sure all of the reasons there, but after talking to Josh a little bit, I decided that I should probably come a little early before this kickoff and see if I could help the downtown business owners address this immediate crisis, especially because of my experience with the tax credits. So early August, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to remember. But early August, I came and I planted myself here for a couple of days. And I had the opportunity to get out and really, walk downtown, talk to business owners. I worked with the chamber and the city to get the word out that I was here. Asked people to schedule appointments ahead of time. Some people did that. Most people just dropped by the chamber offices. And then I personally hosted a meeting, and because I was finding that everybody had the same problem, right? And so rather than repeat it to every property owner down the street, I had an ad hoc meeting outside of my contract with the city. As an individual, Christy Davis had a meeting at the chamber, and I invited the business owners to come in one place, and I walked them through the application process for tax credits, because it looks like most of them are going to benefit from it, because the insurance is going to require that they put a lot of money into these roof repairs. So the chamber was gracious enough to host us, and we had a good turnout of business owners, and I just gave them the application forms and walked them through it. I have had some follow-up from folks since then. I met with a few people today. I've looked, the good news is, as part of that meeting, what I learned was, despite what's happened with the storm damage downtown, you still have folks in the community who are very interested in investing in your downtown, who don't own buildings and want to. And that is great, because if there are people who want to make investments and then they learn about the tax credits, they'll hopefully get in and do it right, and work with you all in the preservation office to meet the preservation standards. So that was really encouraging. What I have found that's unique about your community, and again, I've worked with hundreds of communities, but you have some great downtown business owners. They've been wonderful to communicate with. They're excited about this project, and they want to learn more about the possibilities. You also have, I think, more than many of the communities I work in, a lot of your downtown business owners are folks who grew up here. I mean, they care about the community, and so they're going to continue to invest, because for them, it's more than business, right? It's the survival of their community. So it's been great working with those folks so far. This is not exactly what you hired me to do, but it's what was needed. But it's given us an opportunity to get in on the ground and help people with some of the work that needs to be done. We are now working on a timeline that was in the proposal that I prepared for Josh. We will be working on a draft this fall. We've already started a draft of a new historic context. And have you guys read your nomination, your district nomination? I'll explain kind of what that looks like. So with a historic district nomination, there's this kind of cover form, classic government form. And then there's two major parts that go along with that. One is a section that's physical descriptions. If it's an individual property, you're just doing an architectural description of it. And then the other part is a statement of significance. With the downtown district, usually what we do is we have a map, we say these are the boundaries, and then we go every single property within those boundaries. We identify it as either a contributor or a non-contributor based on preservation standards. And then we'll do a physical description of that building and a history of the building. When your nomination was written in the 80s, it was very slim. And so we will expound on that. We also usually with a downtown historic district will write a history of the development of downtown, which is usually kind of a history of the development of your community. And then we provide information about how the architecture reflects that history. So that's what we're up to. We have already, Brenda was able to identify properties that were non-contributors at the time, in the 80s that are now contributors. I think there's a couple that I've seen in the last few weeks that she identified as non-contributors that we might be able to include. One of those buildings is part of the, help me out, Sparks Music. Sparks? Yeah, okay, sorry. I can see the sign. Sparks Music. There's one there that I think is misidentified. There's another building that has it has a firearms, like a gun store. It's on the west side of the street, not the one on the east
Hollow
side.
Point.
Okay,
Mhm.
yeah. That's one that I think we need to take a closer look at. And actually, the owner was able to provide me with some information there. So we'll continue to hone that to make sure that everybody that is qualified as a contributor will be identified as a contributor and then qualify for the tax credits because they need the help. It's, margins are pretty slim when you're in downtown and, in small town Kansas. So that's, I guess, the basics about what I'm up to and the work that I've done so far. I'm happy to entertain any questions that folks have about the project, about the tax credits, or anything else you want to ask. Fire away.
Awesome. Particularly block with boxes. Some are contributing, some are non-contributing. What's the variance? What makes one contributing?
Yeah. So usually what you do is you evaluate properties by parcel, and there are some overriding characteristics that you have to meet to be a contributor. You have to be at least 50 years old, and you have to maintain integrity from a historic time period. With downtown buildings, a lot of times you've got buildings that were built in the 1880s and then they got changed over time. They got a new facade in the 1920s and then somebody did something in the 60s. That's pretty common. And so you're looking building by building to determine, okay, what's the age of what I'm looking at, and does it have integrity from a time period that's at least 50 years in the past?
A number of years ago, I owned one of the buildings downtown. And I was approached by the state for it. And said that they wanted to improve my building, and I asked them, what benefit would it be to me? Explain about tax credits, et cetera. And then I asked them, how would it be to me? What do you want to do the building? I said, I would replace the windows in the building and saw that. And I said, I'd also like to in the 60s or so, somebody was in middle school originally before.
Yeah. So there's no one size fits all approach. You know this. I mean, it's why it's important to look at each individual building, because you all know this because you use the preservation standards in your reviews. The Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation are pretty broad. They are open to interpretation, and every building is different. I mean, I work with buildings all the time where, someone changed the windows in the 60s. They're not appropriate. We're going to go back to something that's more appropriate, but it's new. Great. It really depends on the building. You have to look at each building to identify what those character defining features are, and then make recommendations about the best approach.
So if I had done that, and went ahead and changed my windows to something more energy efficient and modern, it wouldn't have been accepted.
So
The windows, by the way, in in that building, the windows haven't changed.
Right.
Itself, the building has changed all the windows.
Right. So
Not keep
there's a
the historic integrity.
there's a couple of things going on here. I mean, we have you all are acting as a certified local government, which means that you're playing a role under state preservation statute to review projects in a district, right? And only projects that require permits get reviewed. I'm guessing you require permits or some kind of review on windows downtown. So that goes through a review process under the state preservation statute, and that's part of the role that you all play. When you're applying for funding, you're going through a different process. And what you're doing is a 3-part application process. The first is certifying that your building is a contributor to the district. The second is a review of the scope of work. And they review that scope of work based on the Secretary of Interior standards, and every building's different. If you have I think of an example. You have an early 20th century building and it's got its original windows and they're in good condition and they can be repaired, they're going to recommend you repair them rather than replace them. If they're deteriorated beyond repair, they'll want you to replace them with something in kind. But the challenge you run into with that is if they're wood and you're doing new wood, it's not going to last. So there's all kinds of factors that go into consideration there. Oftentimes, there's been a lot of changes to downtown buildings, and in particular on the storefront levels. Even if you've got an upper facade that's original, you've got a lot of changes happening over time, and that's just accepted as part of the evolution of the building. But it's really a building by building situation. One of the reasons that I was happy to help your downtown business owners with these roof projects is that those are very straightforward when it comes to the standards. And in fact, I was telling Josh this earlier, I worked with a property owner today and we sat down and I helped them fill out the forms. I showed everybody in the meeting that we had in early August how to do it, but sat down with a property owner today and helped them fill out the forms and said, share this with everybody, because with roof projects, they're pretty straightforward. The language is going to be pretty much the same. And there shouldn't be a lot of hangups as far as that review process. You get into details like windows and doors, there's going to be a little more consideration given to changes made, but it really depends building by building and what changes have happened, and there's a lot of moving parts.
There are credits available.
Yes.
What's the probability that a building in this town is granted?
They're not competitive. So you may be familiar with the community service tax credits. In that case, the legislature created the program and they have a budget line, and so it's competitive. Everybody has to apply and sit around and wait and see if they get it or not. The great thing about these, and this is why we're able to work on your roofs, this is an emergency situation. I mean, you do not want everybody to leave downtown at once because their roof is overwhelming. But the great thing about the rehab tax credits is the way it works is you're only funding a successful project. You're getting the credit at the end. So the legislature knows that you've got a project that meets all of the requirements and has gone through the hoops. And then it's a good project before those credits are issued. And so it does not have a cap on it. And we have fought to keep it from being capped, because oftentimes what happens with old buildings is you can't, if you have one that's in really bad shape or something, you have a storm, you can't wait for a year while there's a next round in order to apply. And the other thing I find with those competitive programs is oftentimes, your ability to compete depends on how much you're paying a professional to fill out the paperwork. And I don't think that should be the qualification. We want to make sure that the people who need it most can access the funds.
So you're saying they're non-competitive, I mean, the tax credits are, you just apply and get it or you.
The state rehab tax credits, there's 3 parts to the application. First is certifying that you have a historic building. The second is a scope of work, and you write out, here's what we're doing to the roof, here's what we're doing to the windows. They review that, they approve it. And I have reached out to the preservation office. The folks who manage this program now are people that I hired when I was there and trained. I've reached out to them and I've said, there's an emergency situation in Arc City. We need your help. These are coming in and you need to get them reviewed quickly. And our state preservation office, I think, does a better job than they had historically, I think, turning them around.
I was assured by the deputy there that she would do everything she could to make it.
Yeah, and I made a call too, because I just wanted to be, you know,
But this is previous. I rent in one of the historic buildings.
Mhm.
And so it's been several years ago before, it has nothing to do with the storm. But the owner who is really, no, no, the owner, it's a husband and wife. I said, I see you're working on the roof. I said, you could get good tax credits. And basically he said, well, it's just for him, two owners for
Right.
me to fill it out. I'm just gonna do it. So that kind of thing. I mean, how do you respond to that?
well, I mean, obviously, as a property owner, that's your choice. There are some people who uh, are suspicious of government programs, and you do have to decide. I mean, a lot of it depends on what requires a permit too. If there's work that you can do without a permit, it's a small amount. It probably isn't worth doing the paperwork for. If you're going to get reviewed anyway, um, then it's worth the application. And the simpler the project, the simpler the application. But those are decisions that property owners need to make. I own historic property, and I know how that plays out. You have to decide if it's worth the hassle. The good news is that we have had some changes in the last few years as far as a fee structure that have allowed our state preservation office to hire more people because they know that the property owners, the less sophisticated property owners, those smaller projects are going to take a lot of hand holding and a lot of time, and they have the staff to do it. So, but again, I mean, you're a property owner, you decide, but
When you did that meeting, I mean, of course, and I think, I know there's a kind of a new group of
Yeah.
of owners now.
Yep.
That there are.
The world of historic preservation has changed immensely since I started. I mean, when I started out, we were kind of perceived as the preservation police, right? We were the people who were chaining ourselves to build, right? We were activists.
That
And
mindset.
there was that mindset. With the tax credit program, over time, really we've rebranded historic preservation in Kansas, at least, as economic development. A lot of younger people understand that their building is more marketable when they do maintain that historic character, because it's what makes our downtowns in Kansas different than any other place in the world, right? And so there's an appreciation for that. And so there has been a shift in that. I see it all the time. It used to be that we would have a public meeting for a historic district, and you could expect to be, to hear it, right? Now, I'm working on. I just finished another one of these, and I haven't done a lot of these in the last few years. But what I've noticed is just this complete paradigm shift. When we come to the public meetings, it's more about people are upset because they're not included. It's been an interesting change, refreshing change, but and I'm not sure exactly what all has contributed to that. I think there's a lot of things happening from a pop culture perspective. People are seeing things on television. People are seeing what the Pioneer Woman has done in Pawhuska, that kind of thing. They see examples of it, and they want to play a part in it.
Property owners what is available to them, but also possibly to add more properties to the historic register.
Yeah, it's to take the recommendations from the survey that you all did in 2018 and to incorporate them into an updated district nomination so that we can expand the boundaries and include more contributors.
Does the historic would still have control that they had years ago?
What do you mean? You mean the state or you or?
We still have that agreement for the reviews, if that's what you're asking.
No, more than that, because I did own that building.
Sure.
I was told,
You came to me.
yeah, sure. I was told that if I allowed my building, if I joined, that I would not be allowed to replace my windows. And they would definitely decrepit. And I wanted to go to something more energy efficient, but I was told, no, we will not allow this. We will not allow this. We will not allow this. It's one of the reasons we told.
There's,
I'm not sure what you mean by join. I mean, I don't know if you had a building that was a contributor to the district or if you were outside the boundaries or what the,
it was outside the boundaries.
okay, so you were looking at possibly listing it on its own and yeah. Okay.
Was this about 2011-ish? Does that sound about right? Because at that time they came down here and they did a whole bunch of, they were updating the Kansas Historic Resources Inventory at that time. And they had similar meetings to what Christy's talking about, where they were meeting with property owners, talking to them about the tax credits primarily. And I imagine that they did a few just like you when there was something right on the edge where they were going. Right.
Okay. Okay.
And that's when I asked what benefit is this to me? And what is the disadvantage? And I had the original blueprint of the building. I had all of it. And so I knew what had been and I knew what had changed. And that's what my questions were. One of my questions was, you're telling me the credits are available and it's possible to get them. I was told, no, will not get them. You can apply for them, but you first apply for them.
Well, it could be because they knew if your proposed scope of work didn't meet the preservation standards, that that part 2 scope of work wouldn't be. So I'm not sure.
Said they went mainly to other.
Okay, so you may be talking about, yeah, so I think you're talking about a different program. The state has other economic development programs, including there's a community service tax credit program. It is very competitive. And there's also a couple of other competitive programs that are funded through HUD, CDBG, and those are different than what I'm talking about. Those are competitive.
The important other thing, and this board has actually been through it a few times, is that every decision of either the SHPO or this board is actually appealable to the city commissioner.
So here's,
They've done that a couple
I
times.
mean, you all know you're operating as a certified local government. You have your local preservation ordinance, but you also have an agreement with the State Preservation Office to review things under the state preservation statute.
That's what we did
Just now. Okay, so you review those projects. If you had a project that that you didn't approve, those property owners could appeal to the local governing body and it could be overturned. Right. So that's the state statute process. There's an appeals process. And that could go on. I mean, but let's say somebody said, okay, it wasn't approved when it went through this review under the state preservation statute. But someone said, if you make these changes, you may also qualify for historic tax credits. That gets reviewed separately. And right now, the state preservation, when there are tax credit projects, the State Preservation Office does review them. My guess is, just based on my experience with CLGs like yours, is that there probably is a little more stringent review when there's funding involved. And those are choices that property owners can make. If they file a scope of work and the Preservation Office says no, but they want to continue on, they can go through that state preservation law review and get it appealed. One challenge with that is that then they could, I'm not saying this is the case with doors and windows, but you could be in a situation where you're making changes that makes your building, turns your building from a contributor to a non-contributor, and that could affect the marketability of your building.
I think one thing that people need to understand is that you still can't get tax credits for like roofs and HVAC systems because we don't have to review that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
That's a huge expense.
electric, HVAC,
What we
plumbing,
get trouble with is like windows,
yeah.
you know. 'cause-
Like these roofs, for instance, we're not going to bring them.
No,
Do
it's,
you-
it's not gonna come through the board and say, tell you have to replace the roof to its original state. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, and the preservation office doesn't do it that way either, by
Yeah.
the way. I mean, roofs are just a different, I mean, everybody understands you
The
got to
same with
protect.
like HVAC systems, you could possibly get a tax credit for that, I understand.
Correct.
And you're not gonna put boilers in there. You're gonna put a modern
Right.
system in.
Absolutely. Quick question. Do you all, when you do your landmarks reviews, do you have design review guidelines that are specific to downtown Arc City?
No.
Okay.
No, we're just going
That's
off of
another way to kind of, to get public input, right? And to make sure that you're doing something that's appropriate for your specific community, because every community is different. I mean, none of us are out restoring the White House every day. What we're working on in this particular case, they're commercial buildings. We're doing rehab. We're not doing restoration. We're trying to keep these buildings in use, and there's some flexibility there. But it's something, I don't know if you've looked at any of them, but I might share, I worked in a community similar size as yours, similar downtown on the Missouri side. I can kind of share what we did there, but we had a whole public engagement process, and we really identified, like, okay, what's realistic in this community? You know, how can we be commonsensical about maintaining the character of the downtown and making sure that people can continue to use these buildings?
Exactly, and that's where we ran into with windows. We had a case come up where somebody's wanting to replace windows in a story building with some vinyl windows. As a board,
That'd be me.
yeah, and as a board, we
I think he wasn't on the board
we
yet.
agree, yeah.
Yeah, is that why you got on the board?
Initially,
So-
initially the board said okay, because we could not see any reason not to, but then we were reminded that under the guidelines, we had to come back and say no, but then
Yeah.
the city commission said yes.
Right. I mean,
Right.
everybody has a role to play,
this day,
right?
we would agree. We look up at those windows and we can't see any difference between those vinyl
You-
windows and those.
And
historic
let
windows
let
that
me
were added.
I actually know the building you're talking about, but
Yes,
Let me
yeah.
also say that those windows in the Matlack building, which housed the Taylor Drug store down there upstairs, look as good as they did when we did them 20 years ago.
Right.
Now, at the same time, the Burford Theater got a $100,000 grant to replace all the wood windows up there according to SHPO recommendations out of wood. They're all rotted
right.
out
Well, which is
right
why when you
now.
have wood, you should preserve it because it's old growth wood, right?
Pardon?
Because when you have new growth wood, it's not going to last.
Well, wood will not last
Right.
anyway,
So,
unless you're using fir,
Right.
old growth fir. It'll last a little bit longer. But this has been my issue with SHPO recommendations for a long time, and Josh can tell you that.
Right.
It
It's why you
doesn't
have a
make
landmarks
sense
board.
to a restoration contractor to put in old stuff that will not last, and it's very expensive. And as far as windows go, you cannot tell. It doesn't change the character of the building. And so why do they require like materials?
because they, and you all have the same charge, the decisions you make as a formal board have to be legally defensible, and they have to be based on the standards that are in the guidelines that you're using to make those decisions.
Yeah, how do
You
we
have a
change
role to play.
those?
They're national guidelines.
Yeah.
You have
Change.
you have a role to, but remember, you have a role to play knowing that there's an appeals process,
Right.
right? I guarantee
right.
that there are
Yes.
judges out there who make rulings that they don't like, but they're required to make because they're based on sentencing guidelines, for instance.
What's logical, and also how about excuse me, so at the time, if I remember correctly, they were applying for some tax credits. They decided not to and put the vinyl in, and are they happy about it?
That's their choice.
I would say so.
That's their choice, and I've talked to those property owners. Those are decisions that you make.
When she says that, they don't have a choice, they do have a choice.
They do.
It'll come before the board, and
Right.
Mhm.
us doing our due process will say no. And the city commission will reverse it and say yes.
I would just say your job is, I mean, you have to make legally defensible decisions based on the standards that you,
We found
that
that
you're
out. We
using.
got educated over that.
and
whole
then
situation.
they're, and then if it gets appealed, it goes to them. And also, I want to remind everybody too that, you know, I worked for years as a local preservation planner and also as a state preservation officer. I don't work for state government right now. I agree that there are some things that aren't particularly commonsensical. When I work with clients and when I've been working with your downtown business owners, my job is to listen to them and find out what their needs are and give them, you know, actually it's not my job. I took it on as my job because this is my extra side gig with the roof projects, but to give them the best advice, to get them what they need in a way that meets the standards, and then they make those decisions.
Right. That's
I mean,
what think.
I own old buildings too. I
And-
get it. I've got windows right now that, you know, we completely rehabbed 5 years ago, and they are original. They're from the 1880s, so at least they're old growth wood. But yeah, it's a never-ending maintenance issue.
It seems to me that the SHPO would be more concerned with preserving these historic buildings rather than making absurd rules that make it
They're not-
impossible. Because let me give you another instance on the Taylor Drug Building.
Okay.
It would have cost them a lot more than the building is worth
Right.
to put the windows in. And because the commission had the forethought of saying if we don't allow them to do that, they're not going to do anything, and we won't have the oldest historic building in the town anymore because it'll be gone. And so where's the logic in requiring these recommendations that just don't make sense anymore?
I would say that my advice to you is to be careful and understand what your role is on a commission that has to use those, whether you agree with them or not, has to use those that guidance to make decisions, because you have to make legally defensible decisions. The SHPO doesn't make the rules; they do interpret them. I'm biased, but I think our SHPO is probably one of the easiest to work with in the country, if you can believe it. But it's because we do have folks there, you know, who grew up in small towns, who are pretty pragmatic and will help work through those challenges.
Sure.
Who aren't the preservation police and just say no, no, no. When I managed that staff, I would tell people you can't tell anybody no without giving them an alternative. That's important, and that requires a little bit of creativity, and it requires the ability to listen to property owners and understand what their needs are, and to apply the standards in a way that will work for them.
So I went through the process of getting one of the last historic stone arch bridges on the state national register.
Great.
And and because of the people there were so good to work with.
Good.
And it took a little bit of time, but it went pretty smoothly as long as I did what was required. But you said SHPO doesn't make the rules, they just interpret them. Who makes the rules?
So the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation are standards so the Secretary of Interior is an office within Department of Interior and particularly with the National Park Service.
So basically non-existent anymore.
Well, the law is still on the books. You can cut all the staff you want, but Congress passed those laws and they're technically still on the books. And again, if you have somebody that doesn't, you know, they don't care about the money and they can make a case that there are no alternatives to the approach they're taking, and in particular from an economic standpoint, they can take that case to the city council.
Forfeit their chance for tax credit.
Yeah, yeah,
They'll
Right.
still
That's
preserve
what
their-
they-
yeah. No, I mean, you make educated decisions.
And I would say they were more interested in preserving that building than the SHPO. Well, not the SHPO, but whoever made
Every
those-
project's different. Every project's
yes,
different.
I agree.
And every property's different. Every property's had different changes over time. I guess, again, just my advice to you all as someone who used to run the CLG program and used to train certified local governments like you all is just know what you know, know what the law requires you to do and make sure you're making legally defensible decisions. And sometimes you're making decisions that you don't like. I've been in situations, I used to review thousands of these a year, and I've been in situations where, you know, you have to make a decision based on the standard. And sometimes it's a demolition even. You got a building in really bad shape. Well, by definition, a demolition is destroying a historic property. But we would then guide people through the process of appeal. But that's my advice to you. Yep. And the work that I've done as far as tax credits and working with individual property owners on their projects, again, that's a little bit of a side. That's my side distraction. I took that on as a kind of a pro bono thing. I'm not charging property. I mean, I've tried to spend as much time as I can here because it's the help people need. I'm doing that on a pro bono basis, and it is separate from this project. So, because it's what's needed.
Worthwhile to add, well, like this building. I mean, how many thousands of dollars has the city lost since 1983 maintaining this
Did a
building?
$200,000 roof job
Yes,
that would have been
exactly. That they left money on the table because they never put this in for some reason. They did not include it in the original. Nobody knows. We've asked that question many times. Nobody knows why this building was never included in the original.
Well, and it could be listed on its own. I've worked on a lot of like city auditoriums, city halls, and this building would easily be eligible for listing on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Easily, yeah.
Yep.
We decided it'd be easier to include it in the district because it's adjacent to the district.
All right. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Oh,
We have a member of the public. I don't know if we. Yes, ma'am.
The building I had, didn't have original windows, but some of the windows, they were all wood, but some of them were also metal clad.
Okay.
Those that were metal clad, held up more.
Absolutely. Well, we actually use, you can do aluminum clad wood windows. There are a lot of ways. There are even there are companies that can replicate. Now it's like 3D printing basically, but that can replicate the profiles. I work on a lot of buildings where the windows truly are deteriorated beyond repair and they need to be replaced. And there are a lot more options now for appropriate replacements than there used to be. That's interesting. What time period was the building? Okay, so it might have been part of. Okay, that makes more sense. Might have been part of a pressed metal project or, yeah.
It's like this building is 1919, so it's actually not as old as a lot of the downtown buildings are, because this is City Hall too. Yeah. Yeah, it was next door to this one.
They probably built it and soon regretted it because people had a lot of extra money coming out of World War I in Kansas because grain prices were a record high, oil prices were a record high, everybody was living high on the hog, and then all of a sudden the
Depression.
everything. Well, and in Kansas it hit early.
Yeah.
I mean, in Kansas it hit in the early 1920s, and so there's just a short time period in Kansas where you have this type of building that was constructed, and a lot of them. I've worked on, Memorial Auditorium. I'm thinking of in Eureka. As soon as it was done, I think they regretted it because it was just a really good time, and then everything just crashed with the oil. Yeah, it is. It is. Yep. All right.
National Bank, the RCB was now RCB. I think that was built in 1992. About that same time.
Second too.
Yeah. There's several downtown that are not the original building.
Josh, is there anything else that you wanted me to cover or anything else you
So
need from me?
what's the next? We're gonna have another public meeting?
Yeah, so we have a timeline. This is really the kickoff of the project. We're moving forward. We have a signed contract. We're moving forward with work. when we have a product, our goal, I think we have December for the draft product.
I think that's what you're coming
Our goal is
But you're working on
the updated nomination. Once we have a draft, we'll present it to you all and we'll have a public meeting to share findings. We'll have to double check the timeline, but
It may slip into January.
yeah, it's the bulk of the work will be happening this fall.
You asked if we read that. Well, I've read a lot of it. I mean, building by building.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
That is.
All right.
A lot of cool history in this town that most people don't know about.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Aside from that, gentlemen, happened to be down to the Cherokee Christmas Day in the last year. So, rather than different, they've added, the whole front facade has been replaced, the school is being redone. It holds the state, docking library out there.
Right.
It really is, they've done a tremendous job.
Any other items for discussion? I have a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Do we have to vote on that?
Yes, we do.
Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.